Um, Before we begin, I'd just like to go over some logistics for tonight's meeting. We will be giving our entire project's presentation first, followed by a question and answer portion at the end. There is a Q&A box for you to type in your questions throughout the meeting, and we will be answering those at the end. If you'd prefer, you can ask your question verbally, and just please use the raise hand function to do that, and I will call on you when we get to your question. If you are joining us by phone this evening, please press *9 to raise your hand. And with that, I thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Brian with the city to get the presentation started.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us as we talk about the Liberia 3rd Lane Eastbound project this evening. My name is Brian Leckie, and I'm the new transportation planner for the city of Manassas in the Department of Community Development. Presenting along with me is John Keenan, senior engineer for the city. We also have Matt Arcieri, the director of community development, on hand to answer questions, as well as Carlos Perez, who is here with us if anybody needs Spanish translation. And we also have Jessica Doherty and Ted DeLeo on hand from Kinley Horn, who is our consultant on this project. Okay, next slide, please. So today we're going to start off with an overview of our transportation planning program. And then after that, an overview of the project, kind of go through the history and the goals. And then we'll go into some of the design elements, followed by talking about how the project is funded and what the schedule is going to look like now and going forward. And then we'll have an opportunity to get to your questions and comments in the chat box at the end. So for an overview of the transportation planning program, in 2016, a citizen survey was conducted, and the top priority to emerge from the survey was traffic and access. You can go to the next slide, John. This prompted the creation of the transportation planning program in 2017 to help take a more holistic view to planning the city's transportation planning network. One of our goals of this program is to make sure that the public has an opportunity to provide input on capital projects as early as possible in the project development process, which is why we're gathered here tonight to talk about more about this project, which is only in 10% design, and this will be the norm going forward. In 2019, the city's first transportation master plan was completed with the primary goal of defining the baseline of the city's transportation network and to also identify future improvements to create a more multimodal network. And today, all capital improvement projects in the city emanate from this plan. The Transportation Master Plan was also developed in conjunction with the city's 2040 Comprehensive Plan Update that was adopted in 2020, which identified key transportation projects to help achieve the city's mobility goals. Go to the next slide, John. And the Liberia 3rd Lane project is listed as one of these key projects. And this list can also be found in the mobility chapter of the comprehensive plan, where you can also find other projects that have already been completed or that you might find built in the future. All right, so that was kind of the foundation for the program. Now I'll talk about how this particular project came to being, as well as the goals of the project and what it's aiming to do. But first, we'll take a look at the project corridor. So the project is located primarily along eastbound Liberia Avenue between Route 28 and Euclid Avenue. Route 28 between Commerce Court and Liberia Avenue is also located within the project limits. As anybody who's been through here can attest to, it's a very heavily trafficked commercial corridor lined with car dealerships, strip malls, and other commercial establishments. So the history of this project can be traced back to around 2017 when the city applied for smart scale funding from VDOT to widen Liberia to 6 lanes between Prince William Parkway and Route 28, though funding was not awarded for that project. So this led to a STARS study by VDOT that looked at the corridor to try and identify affordable improvements that provide the best bang for buck, which would then help put the city in a better position to obtain smart scale funding in the future. Among the recommendations from the study were a signal optimization project, which has been completed, as well as widening Liberia Avenue between Route 28 and Quarry Road, although south of Euclid Avenue, the railroad bridge kind of presents a challenge to doing that. Plus, our traffic models show that the largest benefits for the potential cost will be west of Euclid. This corridor was again reevaluated as part of the initial 2019 Transportation Master Plan, where the city traffic model recommended widening Liberia to 3 lanes in the eastbound direction between Route 28 and Euclid. And the existing conditions analysis of the TMP also observed a level of service of F in the morning peak hours and E in the evening peak at the Route 28 and Liberia intersection. This project will help improve the level of service to D in both the AM and PM peaks in 2040 in conjunction with the intersection improvements at that intersection. So all the studies up to this point have identified similar concerns for the Liberia Avenue corridor. And the project goals seek to correct the identified issues, including congestion relief, as well as improving the connectivity of the regional road network to surrounding jurisdictions. The project also looks to improve pedestrian safety and access management along the corridor. So as I said before, we're currently at 10% design, which is pretty early on in the project schedule. The concept was developed in January, and we are now nearing the end of the planning phase, which will conclude with the end of the public comment period around December. The team narrowed proposed improvements down to 2 alternatives, but the final preferred alternative could be a mix of these or a slight revision. We're looking to advance the recommendations from the STAR study and the traffic model analysis from the TMP by widening Liberia to 3 through lanes in the eastbound direction between Route 28 and Euclid Avenue. We are also looking to extend the existing Route 28 northbound left turn lane onto westbound Liberia Avenue. Pedestrian improvements will include sidewalk infill along Route 28, along with a wider sidewalk with a 3-foot buffer along eastbound Liberia, as well as new pedestrian crossings between the driveways on eastbound Liberia and at the intersections with Manassas Junction and Euclid Avenue to help pedestrians more safely cross Liberia. And we would also like to coordinate with OmniRide, the local bus service in Prince William County and here in Manassas, to improve future bus stops and potential pullout lanes along this stretch. So now I'll turn it over to John, who will talk about the design elements and the more technical aspects of the project.
Great, thanks, Brian. And thanks for listening tonight, everybody. I'm happy to have a few folks here to be able to talk through the concepts that we've put together for this project. So just for a little bit of context as we get started talking through, I guess, the technical half of the presentation, we're going to call Liberia Avenue, for the sake of argument, east and west, and Centerville Road, Route 28, north and south, just for the sake of nomenclature here. And I also wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer that our goal here is to talk through some of the generalities of these concepts that we've worked with our consultant, Kimberly Horn, to put together. But as Brian said, we're very early, we're at 10% design. And so we'll do our best to answer your questions at this point, but also based on where we are in the design development process, we might not have answers to your questions. And that's why we're here, to get your feedback. So that being said, as I go through, if you have questions, feel free to type them and we will answer them to the best we can at the end. I also wanted you to note on the map here, this is just a little nicer aerial image than we had earlier on. It has a few road labels. You can see Centerville Road, the intersection of Centerville and Liberia up here at the top left of the slide. And the corridor goes all the way to Euclid. I also just wanted you to note the location of the yellow typical section annotation there on the southern end of the corridor. That's going to be referenced here a few times in slides coming up. So referencing back to that typical section, this is basically looking south in the existing condition in the middle of the block here between Liberia and Euclid. And so the existing conditions of the corridor, we have 2 through travel lanes in each direction. And we also have this 17.5-foot wide 2-way left turn lane in the middle, which is a very wide lane. And we have an existing 8-foot sidewalk on the north with no buffer. And we also have the narrow 4-foot sidewalk on the right of the screen, the southern side of Liberia Avenue, with no buffer. And for anyone who's spent any time walking on this section of Liberia, that narrow sidewalk makes for an uncomfortable experience with the traffic volume that's out there. So let's dive a little bit into the first alternative that we put together. Basically, what we'd be looking at doing is adding the additional 11-foot through lane in the eastbound direction, as Brian referenced before, which would make for a total of 3 through lanes. We'd be maintaining that wide two-way left turn lane in the median, not restricting left turns any more than they already are. But then we'd be adding the 5-foot sidewalk with the buffer on the south side of the street. We'd also be looking at improving crosswalks at all the intersections and driveways along the south side of Liberia. And the widening is going to necessitate relocating the existing signal poles at the entrance to Home Depot and Manassas Junction, Sheehy Nissan. We would need to relocate the signal pole on the Nissan dealership side of the road in order to accommodate that widening. So the widening is also going to require some improvements on Route 28, basically to accommodate the turn lane from northbound Route 28 Centerville Road onto Liberia. And so in doing so, there are a few other operational improvements that we can make on Route 28 that we looked at in this concept. The first is to extend the northbound left turn lane at Liberia Avenue. The traffic modeling that we have shows that this one improvement can dramatically increase or improve the operation at the intersection. And we're also looking at adding a continuous 5-foot sidewalk on the east side of Route 28 from Commerce Court all the way to Liberia. So here's a look at that typical section, basically in the same location as the existing one we looked at a few minutes ago. You can see working from the left side of the screen to the right, no changes on the left side, which is westbound Liberia, no changes to westbound Liberia, no changes to the center two-way left turn lane. And we're basically adding an 11-foot through lane to the outside of the existing. So if you think about the way the roadway is laid out right now, to the outside of the right lane, we would just be adding an additional lane, the 11-foot through lane, curb and gutter, buffer, and a 5-foot sidewalk. So let's start with the improvements that this concept looks at Route 28. As I mentioned before, we have the extended turn lane, which would be for left turns from Route 28 onto Liberia. That turn lane right now ends near the southern entrance to the gas station at the corner. So it'd be a pretty significant lengthening of that turn lane. The new sidewalk is also improved, as I had mentioned before, continuously from Commerce Court all the way up to Liberia. That sidewalk doesn't exist right now in some areas. There's a bit of a goat path on the side of the road and no actual sidewalk there, no accessible path. There is also a project that's currently, the engineering department currently has in right-of-way acquisition, which is shown kind of lightly in gray on the background of this image at the intersection of Route 28 and Liberia. And the idea behind this concept is that it would complement this project that's further along in development right now by allowing for this right turn slip lane from Route 28 onto Liberia and not impact any, to the extent practicable, would not impact any of those improvements that are going to be coming sooner at the intersection. So this slide rotates now and is looking down Liberia a little bit further. The intersection in the middle of the screen is the traffic signal at Home Depot. You can see that the third lane would be added to the outside, more or less where the sidewalk currently sits. And this display shows the approximate scope that sidewalk would encroach on the adjacent car dealerships. So this slide also kind of shows the curb bump outs at the entrances, which were incorporated to improve pedestrian safety and vehicle movements through those intersections and those entrances. But our goal here really is going to be to work with the property owners and business managers along here to best accommodate their operational needs while still meeting those safety goals that we have for the project. And as I mentioned before, this is the location where the signal pole on the south side of the road would have to be relocated, basically shifted back to accommodate the widening. And we also are looking, as Brian mentioned before, at coordination with OmniRide PRTC to put permanent bus stops along this corridor. You can see one labeled here just to the south of that Sheehy Nissan entrance. And I'm going to slide to the next slide, which is the further south approaching Euclid, and you can see there is a second bus stop proposed here, almost to 7-Eleven. And finally, there are pedestrian improvements proposed at the intersection of Euclid and Liberia to make that a four-legged ADA accessible intersection with, with pedestrian push buttons to allow safer traversing for pedestrians of that location. And there's actually another project going on at this intersection as well that Public Works is currently designing, which would turn this in, basically improve three legs of the pedestrian improvements. And this project, again, similar to the intersection of Route 28 and Liberia, our concept here is going to complement those improvements and basically round out anything that can't be done currently. So we'll jump ahead to the next alternative that we put together. As with alternative one, we're looking at the additional 11-foot travel lane on eastbound Liberia. But the big change in alternative two is that we're looking at a modified median configuration, which would narrow it to 15 feet and channelize the left turn lanes. So it would no longer be, for lack of a better term, a free-for-all. There would be dedicated left turn lanes for specific entrances, which would create a much safer traffic situation to have more predictable vehicle movements. We would still be adding the 5-foot sidewalk with 3-foot buffer on the south side of the street, crosswalk style intersections, and we'd still be relocating that intersection at the entrance to Home Depot and Manassas Junction. There are also a few different improvements we're looking at Route 28 in this alternative. We'd be, again, extending the northbound left turn lane at Liberia, and again, have the continuous 5-foot sidewalk from Commerce Court all the way up to Liberia. But we also wanted to take a look at access management. How could we improve safety through that corridor for vehicle traffic and for pedestrian traffic along that sidewalk? And so that's the other change here you'll see as we get into the aerial view. So here's the typical section for alternative two at the same location on Liberia. You'll see the big change here starts right in the middle of the screen with the 12.5-foot left turn lane rather than the two-way left turn lane that was there before. It also has the narrow raised median to direct traffic. And what you'll note is that 12.5-foot lane and with the 2 feet is narrower than the total width of the median in the existing condition or an alternative one. And basically, as we project that out to the right side of the road, the remainder of the improvements are more or less the same. And so this results in 3 to 4 feet less right of way that would be required, fewer impacts to the adjacent property owners on the south side of Liberia. So again, we'll start where we did last time at Route 28. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to be extending. We're looking at extending the left turn lane from Route 28 onto Liberia. The big change here, as I mentioned, is access management. We want to not only connect those sidewalks, but how can we make them safer? How can we make those entrances safer for pedestrians and for vehicles? How can we reduce conflict points and make vehicle and pedestrian movements more predictable to eliminate safety hazards there? This option also would shift the existing bus stop that's in front of the gas station just a little bit to the south and put it in a large pedestrian refuge island that would have a safer place for the bus to pull over and also a safer place for pedestrians to be waiting for the bus. And as I mentioned on the previous alternative, again, concept two would accommodate and complement the upcoming improvements at the intersection of Liberia and Centerville Road. So let's head a little bit further down Liberia once again. Notice the median configuration is changing here. I'm going to change sides for our pictures in case that was blocked from view. The median configuration, we're going to be dedicating left turn lanes, and these in a future phase of design would be evaluated for the length that they would need to be in order to accommodate any turning movements or backing up of vehicles at the intersections and at the signal. The similar improvement or all the improvements outside the median are going to be similar, but as I mentioned in the typical section, and you can kind of tell if you look closely at this area, although it's the image quality might not be the best, there is actually 3 to 4 feet less impact on the properties outside of the right of way, which would, in our hope, have fewer impacts operationally on their businesses and make it easier to accommodate the project. And also, as I mentioned before, the dedicating of those left turn lanes would dramatically improve traffic safety and pedestrian safety to make more predictable movements, turning movements across the road. As we move down to the intersection at Euclid, once again, we can see once again see the bus stop proposed in the same location, just to the west of 7-Eleven, and more dedicated left turn lanes, which would again reduce or eliminate the possibility of head-on collisions in that two-wheel left turn lane. And the same improvements as an alternative one for pedestrians are proposed at the intersection of Euclid and Liberia. And so with that, that was a lot of information about these concepts, but I'm going to pass it back off to Brian for now to talk about funding and schedule for the project.
Great, thanks, John. So yeah, we're going to talk about how the project's funded. Next slide, John. So the project cost as of right now is $8.9 million, funded with regional funds from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. And these funds are intended for design and construction starting in fiscal year 2026 and 2027. Okay, next slide. All right. So tonight we took you from the project's visioning days, from the STAR study, as well as the TMP and the comprehensive plan, where a need was identified, and through the concept development phase, where we started to kind of flesh out the early design of the project. Right now we're in the top right, the public engagement part of the planning phase. Following today's meeting, as well as the in-person meeting happening in 2 weeks from now, we'll be collecting your comments and responding to them. The public comment period will conclude about 1 month after the in-person meeting, October 26th, so kind of around Thanksgiving or early December. But we will still be accepting any public comments in the 2.5-year period between the technically what's the end of the planning phase and the projected start of final design in fiscal year 2026. So this gap period will give us a chance to see what happens with say with the Godwin extension project or any other major capital projects that were assumptions in that model run with the TMP. See whether they get built or not, or if they move forward with a different alternative. And that will offer an opportunity to reevaluate the Liberia third lane project scope and see what the traffic model would say about moving forward. But all things being equal, provided that the Godwin extension and other capital projects in the model assumption get built, and also taking your comments into consideration for the design, each of the 3 phases on the bottom should take about 1 year, again, starting around fiscal year 2026, as that is when funding is authorized. Okay. And we encourage all of you to take the survey, which can be found on the project website. This is another opportunity for you to let us know which alternative you prefer, and also to offer comments on what you think could be done differently, if you support or if you don't support the project, and to give your reasons why. And again, your comments will be taken into account as the project continues to be refined until final design. And now we've come to the Q&A portion. We will respond to your comments and questions in the chat box. Going forward, you can also reach out to myself or John, as we're always available to take requests from the public. So thank you all.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, John. We have a question here in the Q&A box. It says, in option 2, how much impact would that change affect traffic entering the Dunkin' Donuts from the southbound lanes on 28? There is always a backup trying to get into that parking lot.
I can answer that one, Jessica. It's a good question. That's a line that I've sat in myself, so I'm familiar. And I think the answer to the question is that it would not have very much impact. Obviously, it's not something we've looked at specifically at this point in design. But the improvements that we're looking at would really just be ingress and egress from the entrance. and not a change in the amount and the number of vehicles that could be waiting in the line for the drive-through at Dunkin' Donuts. And so there's a possibility that that could still be the case if these improvements were implemented, but that's not. That's the answer I am leaning towards right now, is that this project is not should not impact that condition.
All right, next question here. In option 2, would dedicated turn lanes mean 1, that heading west on Liberia to turn left on 28, or 2, heading south on 28 to turn left on Liberia, the number of turn lanes would be reduced from 2 to 1?
I can answer that one as well, Jess. So I'm just going to slide back to the slide where it would show it. So this is the Route 28. This is the slide for alternative 2 that really shows it. And the number of turn lanes at the intersection of Route 28 and Liberia would not be changed. The dedicated left turn lanes we're looking at are really to the east on Liberia as you head past the car dealerships. So there are already 2 dedicated left turn lanes for this traffic signal at Route 28. And it's really south, or I guess east, based on our nomenclature, east of the intersection at Home Depot is where we'd be looking at dedicating left turn lanes.
All right, next question here we have is, will this project extend to any of the other improvements to widen Route 28?
I can attempt to answer that question too. And I guess there aren't very many people here, so if you'd be willing to expand on the other improvements to widen Route 28, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but there are, as I mentioned, improvements at the intersection of Route 28 and Liberia that this project will complement. And we're also looking at design for the intersection of Route 28 and Sudley Road for the roundabout. But as far as I know, in the city, in this area of Route 28, there are not other improvement or other planned improvements to widen Route 28. I know there's a current project going on in Fairfax County where Route 28 is being widened, and the city is finishing a widening project right now on Route 28 in the area of the Route 234 bypass on the south side of the city. But there are no plans to widen Route 28 in this area right now, as far as I'm aware.
I can jump in. Yeah, the Fairfax County, thank you for that clarification. I mean, in general, and Brian mentioned this is Matt Arcieri, the Director of Planning, by the way. Good evening. We are monitoring, there's a lot of work going on in the Yorkshire area, Prince William County with Manassas Park. Brian mentioned, obviously, we're monitoring progress on the Godwin bypass. So there are some unknowns as to what traffic's going to do as these projects are designed and come online. So some of that 2.5-year design, partially that's when we got funding, but it's also to allow us to kind of monitor where some of these projects go, because obviously the volumes are going to be significantly impacted as some of these major projects in the county, in Fairfax County, come online. So, but we are, just to add a little bit more, watching what's going on with some of the other discussions along 28 and in the existing 28, I should say, in that corridor.
All right.
You're welcome.
No other questions in the chat box right now. Oh, here's one. Will the third lane, right lane at the intersection of Euclid become a right turn only, or will it be a merge onto the bridge?
That's a detail that we haven't, that's something we haven't looked at in a lot of detail at this point, but I think that it would turn into functionally have to be a right turn only lane approaching Euclid. Ted, you can chime in if I say something that's incorrect, but there really is no merge area there across the intersection, and so it would have to be a right turn only lane there at Euclid.
Yeah, John, you've got it. There's some difficulty there as we go east of Euclid. That bridge is a bridge that crosses the railroad. And so any impact to that bridge is, at the moment anyway, pretty much off limits, just from a cost and a coordination perspective. So the idea at the moment is a right turn lane.
Right. Raymond, I see you have your hand raised. Could you please go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much. This is Raymond Beveridge. Good evening. And it's not really a question, it's a strong recommendation. Do not wait to coordinate with OmniRide. Joe Stansby, their Chief of Development in particular. If you're not aware, the 5 local routes that I call them the 2 inner city routes, they've already redesigned, particularly Route 68. All 5 of those routes will be covered with smaller vehicles. The 4 vehicles they need are on order. And for a size comparison is look over there by the H Mart when they park the OmniRide, the Access, the paratransit bus. That's the size of the vehicle. The second off, as they announced in their last public hearing that was held at Georgetown South, they have already laid out to restore the running from the transportation hubs in Old Town, running up 28. They'll cross the Fairfax line and drop at a couple of work centers over there. Frightening concept after all these years. You can actually take an OmniRide bus and say, get to the different, to SAIC over there in Fairfax. So my recommendation is get with Joe Stansby now, because they've already got their plans in motion and they've already talked about, let's put bus stops back along Route 28. Thank you for consideration of my pontification.
And I would like to add that they are looking to put Route 67 down Liberia, like up Liberia to Portner, and then making around a Portner going past Liberia House. I have received those plans. I was actually out looking at some of their potential bus stop locations. So they are looking to put a bus route up this Liberia corridor here.
And just to clarify, we have done some initial coordination. It's just, I think our slide would be better off saying we intend to continue doing ongoing coordination with PRTC, but we have done some of the initial coordination on this plan. We bring them in fairly early into the process these days to make sure they know what we're thinking. But Ray, as always, thank you for that feedback.
You're welcome.
All right, we don't have any other questions popping up. Would anybody like to raise their hand and ask a question verbally?
I'll take a moment while it's quiet to just put in a plug that I'm not sure it was on the final slide earlier, that we're gonna have an in-person meeting to discuss this also on the 26th on October, sorry, it's already October 26th at 7 p.m. In the conference room here at the Public Works building at the end of Public Works Drive.
And I'll also mention, I mentioned it in the beginning, this presentation was recorded, so we'll be posting that to the project's website so that you can go back and refer to that as well. And you can continue to drop comments on that project website as well for us.
I think that's just about it, guys, then. Let me just say on behalf of the planning and engineering departments, we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to collect public input earlier in the process. It's not something the city has always done well, and I hope the folks on here and who watch the recording understand that we're really making a concerted effort to collect public opinion early in the process so we can actually get those comments properly incorporated at the right point in the design. So on behalf of the city of Manassas, we really appreciate folks tuning in, asking questions and submitting comments. And unless someone else wants to wrap this up, thank you all.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you had any other comments, or if you wanted to chat about the project, feel free to give me a call or send an email. My information's right there, and willing to talk with you about it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Have a
very
good night.
much. Have a good night.
All right.